and welcome to episode 46 of Mo Money, investing economics show for millennials by a millennial, where our goal is to educate, entertain, and empower a new generation of investors. I am, of course, the host of this fantastic series, MC Mo, aka Mo Cashin, aka Mo Money. So let's get this show on the road. Now, one thing we can all agree on are bad corporations are bad. Now, that's a pretty broad statement. Now, I'm pretty sure you're nodding your head and thinking, yeah, I can say that I agree with that. I'm sure you can also agree with me when I say bad corporations should be stopped and brought to justice. A pretty broad statement and easy to agree with. For instance, the government and the Federal Reserve dropped the ball in regulating the banks from 2001 to 2007 and thus caused the financial crisis. Were said banks brought to justice? Not at all, but there was an increase in regulation. Pretty much everything is regulated by the government. The food you eat, the medicine you take, the car you drive, the house you live in, your employment, your television, even anal sex is still considered illegal in some states, even though the Supreme Court said in 2003 to get on down with your bad self. During his presidential campaign, Trump promised to eliminate 2 rules of regulation for every new rule created, which is a fantastic idea in my opinion. Under Obama, regulations in the Federal Register set an all-time record of 81,000 pages. Regulations are burdensome for companies, and they are not created equal, and they do not take into account the unique situation within the economy. For instance, the National Association of Manufacturers estimated it takes a small company $34,000 to comply with regulations for each employee, while only $18,000 for large companies. The cost of complying with regulations in the USA has totaled a massive $4 trillion. That's money arguably being wasted. But that's not to say that regulations are a bad thing. It's nice to know that when you're driving a car that it won't explode when you rear-end another car, or that a bank cannot do something like open up a bunch of false accounts with your name and information without first alerting you of their existence. When there is a failure in the free market, it is natural for citizens to demand action by the government in order to prevent another failure, instead of simply letting the free market fix the failure itself. It is nerve-wracking to tell people, don't worry, it's just a small failure. Give the market time to shake out the bad elements and correct itself. It's like if someone breaks into your house and steals everything, but a week later they catch the guy. Sure, you feel better knowing that the thief was caught, but most likely you're still going to be super paranoid. Maybe get better locks, maybe buy a home security system. I don't know, maybe you even might buy yourself a gun. So are regulations and government oversight the best way to protect the people and protect markets, or letting the markets be and reacting to the wrongdoings after they occur the better method? The argument we're about to discuss was laid out in a paper called Liability for Harm versus Regulation of Safety, written by a professor at Harvard Law School, Stephen Chevelle. Harvard has a pretty good, reputation of coming up with smart opinions on things. Chevelle also graduated from the University of Michigan, thus proving to my astonishment that smart people can come through that university. He determined that there are 4 different variables that arise that society would find desirable if there were a liability or a safety regulation. Now, the paper, like most academic papers, does not exactly scream, "Oh my god, this is so much fun." It's not going to have you turning the page to find out what's next like a Harry Potter book. So, of course, we want to make sure that we have as much fun talking about this. So we are going to do
a Mo Money Showdown.
This episode's showdown will be legal liabilities versus safety of regulation, as presented by Dr. Chevelle. So legal liabilities mean punishing guilty parties with rules meant to protect people after the fact that they happen. Meaning legal liability basically says, sure, do whatever you want to do, but if you do these things, we are going to destroy you with the full force of the law. Safety of regulations means we don't trust you to act responsibly, so we are going to make sure you do these things in your business to make sure that you don't hurt anyone. Alright, the first determinant as defined by Chevelle is the possibility of difference in knowledge about risky activities. So let's use an example of automobiles. Let's say the automobile industry was completely unregulated, but there were basic liability laws that said if the car causes someone to die or be seriously injured because of something faulty with the car, then you will be in trouble. So let's say Ford is producing an automobile. If liability laws are strict enough, one would assume they would produce a car that won't explode on impact because they put the gas tank too close to the engine, because then they will be sued and they will lose a lot of money. There is the assumption that regulators would not be able to understand by looking at the blueprint and saying, this looks pretty dangerous. At the same time, regulations may be preferable, as a car company may seek to cut some edges on safety in order to cut back on costs. Take, for example, General Motors. whose faulty ignition caused injuries and deaths in order to save a few bucks. Obviously, GM was not compelled to act responsibly by liability laws and thus cause many injuries and deaths. Still, it assumes that regulators will never have the full information needed to regulate, so legal liability is preferable. Because if the free market cannot figure out who is responsible and who should be punished, then how could we expect the government to know? In short, it is better to say, okay, Ford, obviously you know what is best about your activities, so we won't tell you what to do. But if we find out you did something wrong, you finished. The next determinant as defined by Chevelle is private parties might be incapable of paying for the full magnitude of harm done. Let's take for instance a car mechanic does a crappy job of fixing your brakes because he had a hot date with his wife and your brakes were interfering with him getting there. So you're driving one day and you slam on the brakes, nothing happens, and you go flying into a bakery and absolutely destroy the place, causing thousands of dollars in damages. Obviously, he's responsible, and most likely a small-time mechanic won't have the money to cover your injuries and replace an entire bakery. So what is everyone else supposed to do? Just suck it up and move on? Obviously, this mechanic is ruined, but everybody else has not been made whole. Although this would be a problem, the fear of ruin is usually enough for a company to behave such that they would seek to keep all risks to a minimum. Regulations could prevent this, but occurrences are so infrequent, it may not even be worth it. The third determinant of Chevelle is the failure to sue due to difficulty in attributing harm to the parties who are in fact responsible for producing. Basically saying sometimes it may be hard to prove who's responsible, even though you definitely know who it was. The best examples are environmental and medicine. Take for instance Roundup, produced by shitty devil corporation Monsanto. That's the opinion of a bunch of other people, not saying that's exactly mine. Roundup is sprayed on crops to stop them from being killed by things. Some say it causes cancer, others say it doesn't. Let's just say for the sake of the argument that it definitely causes cancer. That's going to be a little hard to prove. If you try to sue Monsanto and say you lived with a smoker, then they could just blame it on the smoker for the cause of your cancer. Or if you end up getting a heart disease from anxiety pills you were taking 10 years ago, and you find out those pills are definitely the reason why you have a heart disease now, then you go to sue them, and guess what? The company's out of business. You're kind of fucked. Liability is insufficient in this respect. Regulation would thus be more desirable. Regulation would create the need of companies to prove the long-term effects of their activities are not harmful before being allowed to take place. The final of Chevelle's determinants is the magnitude of the administrative costs incurred by private parties and by the public in using the tort system or direct regulation. It sounds incredibly boring, but look, as I mentioned at the start, regulations are expensive. It costs a lot of money to adhere to all the regulation. It's a lot less expensive to react after the damage, if any, has been done, i.e. hiring lawyers, litigation, settlement fees, etc. If all companies acted responsibly in fear of the liability lawsuits, there'd be no costs. Under regulations, there are costs whether harm occurs or not. Even if the regulation eliminates all chances of harm, and if harm still does occur, then you have twice the costs. Then who has to pay? If the company adhered to all regulations, but something bad still happens, are they in the clear? Because technically they followed all the rules, then would the regulatory body have to pay? If so, the public would still have to bear the costs. The bottom line is this. Sometimes bad things happen, even to good people. We cannot bubble wrap all the edges of society, but at the same time we must do what we can as a society to ensure people feel safe and protected to participate within the world of the economy. As we show, the answer by default is not always regulation and more government, because sometimes government can either A, not fix the problem, B, fuck it up and make it even worse, and they cannot do a better job than the free market. But at the same time, there are circumstances when regulations do a better job to correct market failures in a more desirable and timely fashion. But even on top of that, we must also recognize failures of regulation and not default to more regulations, but to the elimination of such regulations and government agencies. We have fallen into a nasty habit of creating government bureaus to regulate everything instead of letting the free market do its job. But we have not fallen into the habit of rejecting government regulation when their regulations fail. In my opinion, there is a world of coexistence between minor government regulations and legal liability that correctly punishes wrongdoers while at the same time protects those who may endure harm. The key, as in all things in life, is just finding that balance. Thank you so much for watching another episode. YouTube is the best place to find new and classic episodes of Mo Money. For now, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share. Follow me on Twitter. Follow me on Instagram. Like me on Facebook. Mo Money. Signing out.
Let me contemplate. I glance in the cut and I see my homie. 16 in the clip and 1 in the hole. Nate Dogg is about to make some bodies turn cold. Now they dropping and yelling. It's a tad bit late. Nate Dogg and Warren G had to regulate.